The crutch hit the linoleum with a crack like a gunshot. James Gallagher's body followed half a second later, his prosthetic leg twisting at an angle that made the old-timers at the counter wince. The sound of his shoulder hitting the floor echoed through Riley's diner like a judge's gavel, final and damning. His remaining leg buckled. His hands, calloused from gripping aluminum for 3 years, scraped uselessly across the worn tile. And then came the laughter. Not nervous laughter. Not the kind that escapes when something unexpected happens. This was theatrical, performative. The kind of laughter that exists only to humiliate, to reduce a man to entertainment, to remind everyone watching exactly who holds power in a room and who does not. Preston Thornton doubled over his $200 Princeton hoodie, riding up over designer jeans that cost more than Jamie's monthly disability check. His friend Marcus Sheffield had his phone out already, recording the smirk on his face, suggesting he'd been waiting for exactly this moment. "Oh my God," Marcus's voice carried across the diner, pitched loud for his video audience. "Dude just ate it. Should we call Life Alert?" Preston gasped between laughs, slapping the table. "Help, I've fallen and I can't get up." The morning crowd at Riley's diner went silent. 43 people by actual count. Construction workers with calloused hands and coffee-stained thermoses, an elderly couple who'd shared the corner booth every Tuesday for 37 years. Office workers checking phones already mentally at their desks. A waitress with 20 years of smile lines around her eyes. The manager who'd opened this place at 5 a.m. for the last 16 years. Not one of them moved. Eyes dropped to plates. Phones became suddenly fascinating. The construction workers studied their eggs like they'd find answers in the yolk. The elderly woman had tears building in the corners of her eyes, but her husband's hand on her wrist kept her seated. The office workers typed faster, documenting without intervening the modern American reflex. Jamie Gallagher lay on the floor of a public restaurant in his faded USMC t-shirt, the Eagle Globe and anchor nearly dissolved from washing, and the only sound was 2 teenagers laughing at a disabled Marine veteran, while breakfast went cold on tables surrounded by witnesses who decided this wasn't their problem. In the corner booth, the one with duct tape holding the vinyl together, Catherine Brennan's coffee had gone cold an hour ago. She'd been awake for 31 hours straight. The ICU shift had been the kind that leaves handprints on your soul. 2 patients coding within minutes of each other, her hands on one chest doing compressions while she called commands to the resident on the other. A family screaming about insurance coverage while their father died 6 feet away, his monitor flatlining to the rhythm of their rage about deductibles. A first-year resident so green he'd nearly contaminated a central line, and Kate had to grab his wrist mid-insertion redirect, finish the procedure herself while he stood there shaking. Iron discipline held her upright through it all. The same discipline that got her through Helmand Province. Through the convoy attack that killed 4 of her unit. Through the medical discharge at 51 that ended her Army career with a piece of shrapnel still lodged too close to her spine to remove. Through the funeral 4 years ago where they'd folded the flag over Michael's coffin, and she'd wanted to scream that flags don't stop a veteran from eating his service pistol in the garage at 3 a.m. She'd slid into this booth at 7:15, ordered coffee she wouldn't taste and toast she wouldn't eat, and tried to remember what it felt like to be a person instead of just a collection of training and trauma held together by routine. The diner hummed with ordinary Tuesday morning life. Construction workers gulping down eggs before the job site opened. Office people checking emails. The elderly couple sharing a newspaper like they'd done for decades. Normal, safe, forgettable. Until 7:24. Kate noticed him immediately. You notice anyone who moves with that particular careful rhythm, the deliberate weight distribution of someone who's had to relearn the simple act of walking. Jamie Gallagher was maybe 32, with the kind of red hair that marked him as Irish 3 generations back, and freckles that made him look younger than the shadows in his eyes suggested. His USMC shirt hung loose on a frame that had lost weight since the fabric was new. The crutches were military-issue aluminum worn smooth at the grips from constant use. His right pant leg was pinned up just below the knee. Clean amputation probably above knee based on the way he distributed his weight. IED. Kate thought automatically, her combat medic brain still cataloging injuries even after a decade out of uniform. Fallujah, maybe. Ramadi. One of the cities that chewed through Marines and spat out pieces. His face carried the kind of quiet exhaustion Kate saw in her own mirror. The look of someone who'd learned that asking for help costs more than struggling alone. That the VA will lose your paperwork 3 times before processing your claim. That civilians say thank you for your service and mean Please don't tell me what service actually cost. He made it to the counter without incident. Ordered coffee and oatmeal. Paid with exact change counted out slowly from a worn wallet, the kind of careful budgeting that happens when disability checks don't stretch to the end of the month. The counterman, Mike Sullivan, gave him a nod that might have been respect or might have been pity. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. Jamie turned to find a seat scanning the room with the situational awareness that never quite leaves you after combat. Looking for the path of least resistance. The table where he wouldn't have to squeeze past anyone, where he wouldn't have to apologize for taking up space, where he could eat his cheap breakfast in peace and pretend for 20 minutes that the world hadn't taken his leg and his career and his sense of purpose and left him with medical bills and nightmares and a studio apartment he could barely afford. That's when Preston Thornton and Marcus Sheffield walked in. They entered like they owned the air itself, 19 and 18 years old respectively, wearing the kind of casual wealth that costs more than most people's monthly rent. Preston had blonde hair styled with product that probably had a French name, 6'2" of athletic privilege, wrapped in a Burberry jacket hanging open over that Princeton hoodie. Marcus was darker-haired 5'11" with a Rolex Submariner on his wrist that caught the light every time he gestured, which was often. They were loud in the way only the truly insulated can be, their laughter aggressive and performative, seeking an audience. Kate watched them scan the diner with the predatory assessment of bored rich kids looking for entertainment. Their eyes passed over the construction workers, too rough, the elderly couple, too pathetic, the office workers, too busy. Then they landed on Jamie, still standing in the middle of the aisle trying to navigate around a waitress balancing 3 plates. Preston elbowed Marcus, smirked. Kate felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Excuse me," Jamie said quietly, trying to angle past the waitress. Preston and Marcus positioned themselves directly in his path. Casual, like they just happened to stop there, like it was an accident. "Oh, sorry, man," Preston said, not moving. "Didn't see you there." Marcus snickered. Jamie's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. Professional, the way Marines are trained to de-escalate before engaging. "If you could just—" "What happened to your leg?" Marcus asked loud enough that conversation stopped at 3 nearby tables. Preston's eyes glittered with something that wasn't quite cruelty and wasn't quite amusement, but lived in the ugly space between. "Skateboarding accident." "Yeah, must have been gnarly," Marcus added, grinning. "Did you forget to wear your helmet?" The diner had gone quieter now, that awful silence of witnesses who don't want to get involved. The waitress squeezed past with her plate's eyes down. Jamie stood there balanced on his crutches, face carefully neutral in a way Kate recognized instantly. The expression of someone who'd had this conversation too many times, who knew that engaging would only make it worse, who was calculating whether he could get past them without incident or whether this was about to become a scene. "Move aside," Jamie said, his voice flat, empty of everything except the request. Preston spread his hands in mock innocence. "We're just asking a question, dude. It's a free country, right? You fought for that, didn't you? Freedom of speech." "Leave him alone," someone muttered from a corner table, but they didn't stand up, didn't move. "Or what?" Marcus shot back, spinning toward the voice. "You gonna do something about it, old man?" The elderly man who'd spoken looked away. Jamie tried to step around them. Preston shifted position, blocking him. It was a dance now, deliberate cruelty disguised as coincidence. Every time Jamie moved left, they drifted left. Right, they drifted right. All while maintaining expressions of innocent confusion like they couldn't understand why this was a problem. "Maybe you should call an Uber," Marcus suggested, his voice dripping with false concern. "Probably safer than trying to walk." Preston burst out laughing, the kind of laugh designed to humiliate, designed to make everyone in the room complicit through their silence. Kate's hands tightened around her coffee cup. She recognized this dynamic. Different contexts, different countries, but the same mechanism. The specific pleasure some people take in demonstrating they can hurt someone with complete impunity. In Helmand, it had been Taliban fighters taunting prisoners. In the ICU, it was insurance reps denying coverage while maintaining plausible deniability about why the chemotherapy request was rejected for the 3rd time. Same cruelty, different uniform. Jamie's face had gone carefully blank, but Kate could see the tension in his shoulders, the white-knuckle grip on his crutches. He was one wrong move from either exploding or breaking, and these kids knew it. They were counting on it. Counting on him either making a scene which would let them play the victim or absorbing the humiliation in silence which would let them enjoy the show. "I need to get past," Jamie said. There was a thread of steel in his voice now, the kind that comes from giving an order you know won't be followed but has to be given anyway. "So get past," Preston said, not moving an inch. Jamie tried to force his way through the gap between them. It happened fast. Preston stepped backward, bumped into Jamie's shoulder just hard enough to throw off his balance. On two legs it would have been nothing. A minor jostle, easily recovered. On one leg and two crutches it was everything. Jamie's prosthetic twisted. His weight shifted wrong. The physics of standing on aluminum and carbon fiber instead of bone and muscle betrayed him. He went down hard crutches, clattering across the floor like dropped rifles. His shoulder slammed into the edge of a table before he hit the linoleum. The sound of his body hitting the ground silenced every conversation in the diner. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then Preston and Marcus started laughing. Not polite snickers, not nervous giggles. Full theatrical laughter. Doubled over, slapping each other's shoulders. Marcus had his phone out now, recording his thumb, probably already composing the caption for whatever social media would make this moment viral. Turn a man's humiliation into content, into likes, into validation that they were clever and funny and the center of attention. "Oh my God, did you see that?" Marcus gasped between laughs. "Dude just fell over." "Should we call Life Alert?" Preston wheezed. "Help, I've fallen and I can't get up." They were performing now, playing to an audience that mostly looked away. A few people pulled out phones, but Kate couldn't tell if they were recording the harassment or just pretending to be busy. The elderly woman had tears in her eyes, but she didn't stand. The construction workers stared at their plates. Mike, the counterman, reached for the phone, probably to call the police, but moved with the slow reluctance of someone who knew the cops wouldn't arrive in time to matter. Jamie lay on his side, one hand pressed against his ribs where he'd hit the table, the other reaching for his crutches just out of range. His face had gone red. Not with pain, though Kate could see that too in the way he held his shoulder. With the deep, burning humiliation of being made helpless in public, of being reduced to a spectacle for the entertainment of children who'd never earned anything and never sacrificed anything and never understood that some people gave pieces of themselves to a country that couldn't be bothered to protect them in a diner on a Tuesday morning. Kate had been trained for a lot of things. Trauma medicine under fire, triage with limited resources, keeping your head when everything around you was screaming chaos, performing a thoracotomy with a knife meant for cutting rations because the surgeon was dead and the patient was dying and someone had to try. But nobody had trained her for this specific moment, for the precise calculation of when staying silent makes you complicit, when the professional thing to do is the wrong thing to do, when another person's dignity matters more than your own safety. She'd made this calculation before. Helmand Province, 2009. Forward Operating Base Chapman. She'd watched Sergeant Davis abuse the interpreter Fahim, slapping him, calling him terrorist, saying things about his mother that made the man's face go stone still with rage he couldn't express because he needed the job, needed the American money to feed his family. Kate had seen it. Said nothing. Chain of command. Not her business. Fahim was a civilian contractor. She was a specialist. Davis was a sergeant. You didn't skip ranks to report things. You stayed in your lane. You did your job. Fahim quit a week later. 10 days after that, their patrol walked into an ambush in a neighborhood Fahim would have warned them about. Would have known was compromised. Would have told them the locals had gone quiet because Taliban had moved in overnight. 4 killed in action, 6 wounded. Kate had worked on all of them, had held pressure on a femoral artery for 90 minutes waiting for medevac, had performed CPR on a specialist who'd been telling jokes about his girlfriend's cooking 20 minutes before the RPG hit, had gone back to base covered in blood that wasn't hers and known with absolute certainty that her silence had contributed to this. She'd promised herself then, never again, never stand by, never calculate that speaking up costs too much. Because silence has a price too, and it's paid in blood and guilt and 3 a.m. moments when you can't sleep, because you're doing the math on how many people are dead because you were professional instead of right. Kate stood up. The movement was quiet, controlled, but in the sudden stillness of the diner it felt loud. Every eye that had been carefully looking elsewhere suddenly focused on her. The scrubs marked her immediately. Medical, probably just off shift, tired, not a threat. Preston and Marcus glanced at her and dismissed her in the same moment. 135 pounds of exhausted woman looking at 215 pounds of teenage boy who'd never been told no in his life. Kate walked toward Jamie with the same steady pace she used approaching a patient in crisis. No rushing, no hesitation. She knelt beside him, her knees protesting the movement joints that hadn't been the same since the shrapnel wound and the surgeries and the years of standing 12-hour shifts. Up close, she could see the shame in his eyes, raw and bleeding. Worse than any physical injury. "Are you hurt?" she asked quietly, her voice pitched for him alone. Jamie shook his head, not trusting his voice. "Anything broken?" Kate's hands moved with professional efficiency, checking his shoulder, his ribs, his neck. Ribs, wrist, collarbone. "No," he managed. Just embarrassed." "Nothing to be embarrassed about," Kate said and meant it. She retrieved his crutches, checked them quickly for damage, handed them back. "Let's get you up." "Oh, how sweet," Preston drawled from above them. "Grandma came to help. Does he need his diaper changed too?" Kate stood slowly. When she turned to face them, something in her posture had changed. Not aggressive exactly, but different. The boys were too stupid or too entitled to recognize it. But Kate knew what she looked like. She'd seen it in reflections during firefights, in windows when carrying wounded, in mirrors after bad shifts. She looked like someone who'd run out of patience for bullshit. "You need to leave," she said. No heat in her voice, no anger, just flat statement of fact. Marcus laughed. "Or what, you gonna fight us 2-on-1, how's that fair?" Kate said nothing, just stood between them and Jamie, her body language saying everything her silence didn't. Preston stepped closer, using his height advantage invading her space. 6'2", looking down at 5'6". "Yeah, what are you going to do about it, lady? You look like you can barely stand up yourself." He was right about that part. Every muscle screamed for rest. Her back ached with the kind of deep fatigue that comes from holding the same position too long under too much stress. But exhaustion doesn't mean helpless. Tired doesn't mean defenseless. Preston made his mistake then. He reached out and grabbed Kate's wrist. Not hard enough to hurt. Not yet. Just hard enough to control. To establish dominance. To remind her that he was bigger and stronger and she should know her place. His fingers wrapped around her wrist with the casual confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences for touching people without permission. The grab lasted exactly 1.5 seconds. Kate moved with the mechanical precision of someone who'd been drilled in combat maneuvers until they became muscle memory. Until thinking about them would actually slow you down. She rotated her wrist against his thumb. The weakest point of his grip broke free with almost no effort. His brain was still processing the surprise when her other hand locked onto his wrist, reversing the grip, and she stepped backward, pulling him off balance, using his own forward momentum against him. Basic combatives, level 1. Straight from the Army Field Manual. She'd taught this throw to privates fresh out of basic. She could do it asleep. Preston hit the floor on his knees. His arm twisted at an angle that stressed his shoulder joint without quite dislocating it. His face went from smug to shocked to scared in about 2 seconds. Marcus rushed her. Kate saw him coming in her peripheral vision, didn't even turn her head. He was telegraphing the move, shoulders squared, hands out like he was going to shove her. Sloppy, emotional, amateur. She waited until he was committed, until his weight was all moving forward, until there was no way to stop his momentum. Then she stepped inside his reach and drove her shoulder into his armpit while her hands locked onto his jacket. Basic hip throw, using his energy to complete the arc. He went up and overlanded on his back hard enough that she heard the air explode out of his lungs. The entire sequence took maybe 8 seconds. 2 boys down, 1 nurse standing between them and the Marine on the floor. The diner had gone absolutely silent. Kate stepped back, putting space between herself and both boys' hands at her sides, but weight balanced ready. Neither boy moved to get up. Preston was staring at her with something that might have been fear or might have been rage. Hard to tell with 19-year-olds who'd never been told no. Marcus was gasping, trying to remember how breathing worked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. Someone started clapping. Slowly at first, then others joined in. Not everyone. Some people still looked away uncomfortable with the violence, even if it had been defensive. But enough. Enough that Kate felt her face flush, felt the adrenaline crash starting to hit her system. Mike, the counterman, was on the phone now, talking fast. Police. Kate's stomach dropped. She looked down at the 2 boys at her hands, at Jamie, who was staring at her like he wasn't sure what he'd just witnessed. This was bad. This was very, very bad. She'd just assaulted 2 civilians in a public place. Didn't matter that they'd harassed a disabled veteran. Didn't matter that one had grabbed her first. She'd put hands on them, taken them down hard, and about 43 people had watched her do it. Preston seemed to realize this at the same moment. His expression shifted from shock to calculation. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands, started recording. "You attacked us," he said, his voice pitched loud for the recording. "Unprovoked, you assaulted us." "That's not—" someone started to object, but Preston spoke over them. "We were just standing here and this crazy woman attacked us. I'm injured. Look at my shoulder." Marcus caught on, scrambled to his feet, clutching his ribs. "She's insane. We didn't do anything." Kate stood there, too tired to argue, watching her career circle the drain. In the ICU, she'd learned that some patients lie with complete conviction. That reality is subjective when money and power get involved, that the truth matters less than the story. Jamie struggled to his feet, propped himself on his crutches. "She didn't attack anyone. You grabbed her first. I saw it." Preston sneered. "You're a homeless vet. Nobody's going to believe you." "I'm not homeless." "Might as well be. Look at you." Kate felt Jamie flinch beside her, and something in her chest went cold and hard. She'd been ready to accept consequences for her actions. That was part of the training. You make your choice, you live with it. But watching these entitled kids try to destroy a man who'd given everything for a country that couldn't be bothered to protect him in a diner that was something else. "I have video," a voice called out. An older woman, probably 70, holding up her phone with a shaking hand. Margaret O'Brien, though Kate didn't know her name yet. Irish grandmother with steel-gray hair pulled back in a bun and eyes that had seen enough cruelty in her life to recognize it when it happened 6 feet away. "I recorded the whole thing," Margaret said, her voice stronger now. "They knocked him down. They grabbed her first." "Delete that," Preston snapped. "No," Margaret said. And there was steel in her voice that reminded Kate of her own grandmother. The kind of woman who survived the Depression and buried 2 husbands and raised 5 kids and didn't take orders from children. "I don't think I will." Marcus pulled out his own phone, started making a call. "Dad." "Yeah, we need you at Riley's Diner right now. Some psycho attacked us." "No, we're fine, but we need—" "Yeah, okay, we'll wait." Kate's stomach twisted. "Dad." Of course. These kids had money, which meant lawyers, which meant power. She'd broken the first rule of surviving as a working-class person in America. She'd put her hands on rich people's children. The police arrived in 6 minutes. 2 officers, both male, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. They walked in, assessed the scene with practiced eyes. 2 teenage boys with minor injuries. 1 exhausted woman in scrubs. 1 disabled veteran. And a diner full of witnesses who all had different stories depending on who was asking. "All right," the older cop said, his voice carrying the weary authority of someone who'd done this too many times. "Who wants to tell me what happened?" Everyone started talking at once. Preston spoke loudest, most insistent, painting a picture of unprovoked violence, of a crazy woman attacking innocent customers. Marcus nodded along, adding details, building the narrative like they'd practiced it, like they'd done this before. Jamie tried to interject to explain, but the younger cop cut him off. "Sir, I need you to step back. I'm a witness." "Step back, sir." Margaret tried to show her phone her video. "Officer, I have footage." "Ma'am, 1 moment, please." Kate stood silent, watching the machinery of official response grind through its gears. She knew how this worked. The boys would give their statement. She'd give hers. Witnesses would be interviewed. The video might or might not be admissible depending on how the cops felt about it. And somewhere in the background, lawyers would already be getting involved, shaping the narrative before the truth even had time to put on its shoes. The older cop turned to Kate. "Ma'am, did you put hands on these young men?" "Yes." "In what capacity?" "They knocked him down," Kate said, nodding toward Jamie. "They were harassing him. One of them grabbed my wrist. I defended myself." "She attacked us," Preston shouted. "She's lying." The cop held up a hand. "Son, I'm going to need you to calm down." "Calm down. She assaulted us. We could have been killed." Kate almost laughed at that. Killed by a woman who weighed 135 pounds soaking wet and could barely keep her eyes open. But she'd learned a long time ago that rich kids live in a different reality. One where any challenge to their authority feels like a mortal threat. That's when the door opened and Victor Thornton walked in. Kate didn't know his name yet, but she knew the type immediately. Mid-60s silver hair styled with the same expensive precision as his son's, wearing a suit that cost more than Kate made in 2 months. He moved like a man who'd commanded battalions, not boardrooms, the ramrod posture, the measured stride, the way his eyes swept the room in a tactical assessment before fixing on his target. Military, high rank, officer class. He scanned the diner, located Preston, and his expression hardened into something ugly. "Dad," Preston started. "Don't." Victor's voice cut like a blade. "Are you injured?" Preston rubbed his shoulder. "My shoulder. Badly." "No, you're not." "Then stop whining." Victor turned to the officers and his entire demeanor changed, became almost friendly. Professional. Gentlemen. Victor Thornton. I believe my son and his friend were assaulted by this woman. The older cop's expression went carefully neutral. Mr. Thornton, we're still gathering information. I'm sure you are. Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm also sure you have eyewitnesses, probable cause, and a clear case of assault. So I'm going to ask you very politely to arrest this woman before I have to make some uncomfortable phone calls. The threat was delivered with a smile, but Kate watched the cop's jaw tighten. He knew what Victor meant. Phone calls to the chief, to the mayor, to whoever held the leash on the department budget. Mr. Thornton, we need to interview witnesses. You have witnesses. Victor gestured to his son. You have victims. You have the perpetrator standing right there. What else do you need? He grabbed her first, Jamie said, his voice hard. I saw it. She defended herself. Victor turned to him with the kind of withering look usually reserved for insects. That's when he saw the USMC shirt, the prosthetic, the crutches. His eyes narrowed slightly, reassessing. And you are, Victor asked, a witness. I can see that. Name and unit, son. The automatic military phrasing, the expectation of obedience. Jamie's spine straightened despite himself 20 years of conditioning responding before his brain could stop it. Gallagher, sir. 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. Fallujah. Yes, sir. 2019. Victor nodded slowly, and Kate could almost see him filing the information away. Young, disabled, probably PTSD, probably unreliable, probably poor, definitely not a threat to his narrative. Then you should understand, chain of command, Corporal. This is not your concern. Stand down. Jamie's face flushed, but the order hung in the air with the weight of all the orders he'd followed before. All the times a superior officer had told him to shut up and color. All the years of training that said, you don't contradict authority. Kate stepped forward. He's not your Marine anymore, General. Victor's head turned slowly. Really looked at her for the first time. His eyes caught the faded combat medic patch on her jacket, visible where the zipper had pulled it into view. The scar on her forearm, puckered tissue from shrapnel that had come too close to the radial artery. The way she held herself despite obvious exhaustion, that particular blend of discipline and defiance that only came from service. And you are. Specialist Catherine Brennan, 75th Ranger Regiment Support, Afghanistan. Something flickered across Victor's face. Recognition, maybe. Or calculation. Rangers. He said it like a diagnosis. Then you definitely know better than to assault civilians in a public place. I know right from wrong, sir. And this was wrong. Victor's smile had no warmth at all. We'll let the courts decide that, specialist. Officers. The younger cop approached Kate with handcuffs, looking apologetic. She didn't resist, didn't see the point. She'd made her choice back when she stood up from that booth. Everything after was just consequences. Catherine Brennan, you're under arrest for assault and battery. You have the right to remain silent. The Miranda warning faded into background noise. Kate watched Margaret clutching her phone like a lifeline. Watched Jamie standing there with his crutches looking destroyed. Not by the fall or the harassment, but by the helplessness of watching someone who'd tried to protect him get crushed by a system neither of them could fight. I'll testify, Jamie called after her as the cop guided her toward the door. I'll tell them what really happened. Victor Thornton laughed. Actually laughed. You'll tell them what you think happened, and then my lawyers will tear you apart on cross-examination. They'll ask about your medical history, your psychiatric evaluations, your medication. They'll make you look so unreliable that nothing you say will matter. Kate twisted in the cop's grip, looked back at Victor with the same flat assessment she'd used evaluating trauma patients, determining who could be saved and who was too far gone. You know what the saddest part is, she said. Your son was probably a decent kid once. Before you taught him that money means he doesn't have to be. Victor's smile didn't waver. And you were probably a decent soldier once. Before you decided assault was an acceptable response to words. The cops pulled her toward the door. The last thing Kate saw before they led her outside was Jamie standing alone in the middle of the diner, surrounded by people who'd watched him fall and done nothing, staring at his crutches like he'd forgotten what they were for. The squad car was parked in a loading zone, engine running. Kate had ridden in plenty of vehicles during her service. Humvees, transport trucks, medevac helicopters. But climbing into the back of a police cruiser felt different. The door shut with a heavy thunk that sounded like finality. Through the window she could see the diner. Victor had an arm around Preston's shoulder, talking to him in low tones, teaching him. This whole thing was a lesson Kate realized. How to weaponize money. How to turn being the aggressor into being the victim. How to destroy someone without ever having to account for it. The younger cop got in the driver's seat. The older one in passenger. Neither spoke to her. They probably saw a dozen situations like this every week. People with no power getting crushed by people with all of it. And they'd learned a long time ago that caring about it would destroy them. The radio crackled, dispatch calling another unit to a domestic disturbance. The engine rumbled to life. Kate closed her eyes. A day and a half without sleep. 2 lives saved in the ICU. 1 Marine defended in a diner. And now she was being driven away in handcuffs while the actual aggressors went home to play video games and forget it ever happened. But the story wasn't over, not even close. Because what Victor Thornton didn't know, what his lawyers and his money and his influence couldn't prepare him for, was that some people fight back. Some people have brothers and sisters who don't forget. Some debts come due no matter how much power you think you have. The squad car turned a corner and Riley's diner disappeared from view. In the back seat, exhausted and handcuffed, Kate thought about Helmand Province, about the interpreter she'd failed to protect, about the 4 soldiers who died because she'd stayed silent, about Michael in the garage with his service pistol because the VA wait list was 6 months and his nightmares wouldn't wait, about all the times she'd chosen professional over right, and how those choices accumulated like plaque in an artery until one day your heart just stopped. She'd made a different choice today, and whatever came next, whatever consequences landed on her head, at least she'd stood up when everyone else sat down. At least this time she'd spoken. Morning traffic flowed around them like water around a stone. Somewhere people were going to work, drinking coffee, living their normal lives. Kate had lived a normal life once, before the wars, before the wounds, before she learned that standing by and doing nothing had a cost higher than any consequence of action. She wouldn't go back to that life even if she could. The price was too high, and she was done paying it. The holding cell smelled like disinfectant and desperation. Kate sat on the metal bench with her back against concrete blocks that had been painted institutional beige sometime in the previous century, watching fluorescent lights flicker in a rhythm that matched her headache. They'd processed her an hour ago. Fingerprints that left gray residue on her fingers despite washing. Mugshot with a placard showing numbers she'd never imagined would be associated with her name. Personal effects logged into a manila envelope that would probably end up in a landfill when this was all over. The booking officer had been professionally detached, going through the motions with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd stopped seeing people and only saw cases. Numbers to be entered, forms to be completed, another body moving through the system like parts on an assembly line. She'd asked for her phone call. They'd told her to wait, so she waited. Across the corridor, a drunk was singing something that might have been a country song or might have been a cry for help. 2 cells down, a woman was arguing with someone who wasn't there, her voice rising and falling in a one-sided conversation that suggested mental illness or drugs or both. The sounds echoed off concrete and steel, creating a symphony of human misery that Kate had heard variations of in field hospitals and trauma wards, places where people ended up when everything else had failed them. The door at the end of the corridor buzzed and swung open. Detective Angela Morrison walked through mid-40s with gray threading through her braids and eyes that had seen too much to be shocked by anything anymore. She carried a folder and a styrofoam cup of what smelled like actual coffee, not the burnt sludge from the precinct pot. "Catherine Brennan." She stopped in front of the cell. "That's me. Detective Morrison. I'm assigned to your case." She unlocked the cell door but didn't open it yet, studying Kate with the kind of attention that suggested she was looking for something specific. "You want to tell me what happened at Riley's diner this morning?" Kate met her eyes, trying to read the angle. Cops had agendas same as everyone else. Some wanted truth, some wanted clearance rates, some just wanted to get through their shift without paperwork. Morrison's face gave nothing away. "I defended myself and a disabled veteran from harassment." Morrison opened the cell door, gestured for Kate to follow. They walked down the corridor past the other cells through another locked door into an interrogation room that looked exactly like every interrogation room Kate had seen in movies and television shows. Scarred table, uncomfortable chairs, mirror that was definitely one-way glass, camera in the corner with a blinking red light. Morrison sat down, opened the folder, pulled out a stack of photographs, crime scene photos, the diner from multiple angles, the floor where Jamie had fallen. Close-ups of Preston and Marcus showing minor bruising, reddened skin, nothing serious. You did this. Morrison tapped one of the photos showing Marcus's swollen wrist. I defended myself after he rushed me. You're a nurse. ICU nurse at Graymont Memorial. Just finished a shift before this happened. Morrison made a note. That's a long shift. We're understaffed. Story of American healthcare. Morrison looked up. You tired? Exhausted. Tired enough to misjudge a situation, maybe overreact. Kate felt the trap closing but kept her voice steady. I wanted coffee and nothing else, but I wasn't so tired that I imagined watching two teenagers knock a one-legged Marine to the floor for entertainment. Morrison pulled out another photo. This one showed Kate mid-throw. Preston's face twisted in surprise and pain. Someone in the diner had captured it with their phone, the image grainy but unmistakable. This looked like self-defense to you? Morrison asked. It looks like basic Army combatives applied to someone who grabbed me first. Check the security footage. You'll see him reach for my wrist. I did check the footage, the diner's security cameras. It's grainy and the angle's bad. Could argue either way. He reached for you or you reached for him. Kate's heart sank. Then she remembered, what about the witness video? The woman who recorded on her phone? Morrison's expression shifted slightly. That's different. Margaret O'Brien. We're tracking her down for a formal statement. But I'll be honest with you, Miss Brennan, even with video evidence, this is going to be a hard sell. You put two boys on the ground in a public place. Victor Thornton's already hired Miranda Blackstone. Who's that? The best defense attorney money can buy. Except in this case, she's prosecuting you as a special consultant to the DA's office. They're throwing everything at this. Kate felt something cold settle in her chest. What about James Gallagher, the Marine they harassed? Mr. Gallagher gave a statement. Says you defended him after the boys knocked him down. Morrison paused, choosing her words carefully. He also has a history of PTSD, 2 psychiatric holds in the last 3 years. Currently receives disability payments for mental health issues. Kate's stomach dropped. So you're going to ignore him because he's damaged? I'm going to weigh his testimony against other evidence. That's my job. Your job is to find the truth. My job is to build a prosecutable case. Truth and prosecution don't always overlap. Morrison pulled out another document, slid it across the table. This is a statement from Victor Thornton's attorney. They're prepared to press full charges. Assault and battery, possibly elevated to assault with intent, given your military background. They're also considering a civil suit for emotional damages, medical expenses, and pain and suffering. Kate scanned the document, her exhaustion making the words blur together. Emotional damages for 2 boys who spent 10 minutes torturing a disabled veteran. Medical expenses for bruises that would heal in a week. Pain and suffering billable at whatever rate made the lawyers rich. This is also an offer, Morrison continued. They're willing to settle. You plead to disorderly conduct, suspended sentence, community service, no jail time, public apology. Agree to stay away from the Thornton family. In exchange, they drop the civil suit and you walk away with a record but your freedom. And if I refuse? Then we go to trial. You face 2 to 5 years if convicted, plus whatever damages the civil suit awards. You'll lose your nursing license, your career, everything you've worked for. All because you decided to play hero in a diner. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of choices and consequences. Kate knew Morrison wasn't being cruel. She was being realistic. This was how the system worked when you had no money and no power. You got offered a deal that would ruin your life slightly less than the alternative, and you were supposed to be grateful for it. I need to think, Kate said. Take your time, but not too much time. Thornton's attorney wants an answer by end of business today, or the offer disappears. Morrison stood, knocked on the door. A uniformed officer opened it from outside. Can I make my phone call now? Kate asked. 1 call. Make it count. They led her to a payphone in the corridor that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. Kate picked up the receiver, her mind running through options. She didn't have money for a good lawyer. She didn't have family nearby. Her friends from the Army were scattered across the country, and the ones she'd stayed close with were dealing with their own struggles. PTSD, unemployment addiction. All the fun prizes you won for serving your country. She dialed the one number she'd memorized but hadn't called in 3 years. It rang 4 times. She was about to hang up when a voice answered, thick with Scottish burr, even after 40 years in America. This is Sergeant Major McAllister. Kate's throat tightened. Mac, it's Kate Brennan. A pause long enough that Kate thought the line had gone dead. Then a sound like air leaving lungs too fast. Katie, lass. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Where are you? Detention center in Graymont City. I need help. What happened? Kate gave him the short version. The diner, the harassment, the fight, the arrest. Mac listened without interrupting, a skill he'd perfected during their deployment when Kate would brief him on casualty reports and he'd have to make decisions about medevac priority with incomplete information. When Kate finished, Mac was quiet for a long moment. You put hands on Victor Thornton's kid. Kate went very still. You know him. Everyone knows him. Mac's voice had gone hard. Real estate developer. Owns half the commercial property in 3 counties. Major political donor. Retired 3-star general. Made his money after service but kept his rank connections. His son's a piece of work. Got kicked out of 2 prep schools, but daddy's money made those problems disappear too. So I'm screwed. Probably. Another pause. But maybe not. Kate heard something in the background. Papers rustling. A keyboard clicking. Last, do you still have your discharge papers, your DD 214? In my apartment. Why? Because you didn't just defend some random veteran. You defended a Marine as a former Army medic in a situation where you were clearly outnumbered. That's not assault. That's what we trained you to do. Kate felt something flutter in her chest that might have been hope or might have been delusion. Mac, I'm not in the military anymore. That training doesn't give me the right to. It gives you the right to defend yourself and others, and it establishes a pattern of behavior that's consistent with your service record. How many combat saves do you have documented? 18 confirmed, maybe 22 total. And how many commendations? I don't remember. 6 or 7. It's 9, including a Bronze Star with Valor. I know because I wrote 3 of the recommendations myself. Mac's voice had shifted into command mode, the tone he used when planning operations. Listen to me carefully, Katie. Don't take the plea deal. Don't admit to anything. Tell them you want a public defender and you're invoking your right to remain silent. Then sit tight. Mac, I can't afford to fight this. You won't have to. I'm making some calls. There are people who owe you, Kate. People who remember what you did over there. Let me see what I can do. I don't want charity. This isn't charity. This is Marines taking care of their own. Army too, even if you lot are slow. A hint of the old humor crept into Mac's voice, the gallows comedy that got them through the bad days. Just don't do anything stupid until you hear from me. Can you manage that? Kate almost laughed. I'll try. Good. I'll have someone contact you within 6 hours. Keep your head down. And remember, you're not the one who should be ashamed here. The line went dead. Kate hung up the receiver and stood there for a moment, letting Mac's words settle into the exhausted spaces in her mind. She'd spent the last 3 years trying to leave the military behind, trying to build a civilian life, trying to convince herself that her service was just a chapter in her past and not the defining feature of her identity. But standing in a police station corridor facing charges for defending someone who couldn't defend themselves, she felt the old training click back into place like muscle memory. The officer led her back to the holding cell. Morrison was waiting there, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. "Make your call," the detective asked. "Yeah, got someone working on a lawyer." Morrison's expression shifted slightly. Something that might have been respect or might have been pity. "Victor Thornton's attorney called while you were on the phone. They've sweetened the offer. Plead to disorderly conduct. No jail time. Record gets expunged after a year of good behavior. All you have to do is apologize publicly and agree not to go within 100 yards of his son." Kate met Morrison's eyes. "Tell them no." "You sure about that? This might be the best deal you get?" "I'm sure." Morrison shrugged. "Your funeral. Arraignment's scheduled for tomorrow morning. You'll be held overnight unless you can post bail." "How much?" "Judge will set it at arraignment. But given the circumstances, I'd guess $50,000. You'd need 10% cash to a bondsman, $5,000. Kate had maybe $800 in her checking account and another $1,200 in savings that was supposed to be her emergency fund. She'd already burned through her emergency fund twice in the last year, once for car repairs, once for a root canal her insurance didn't cover. The math was simple and devastating. "I can't make bail," Kate said quietly. Morrison nodded like she'd expected this. "Then you're a guest of the county until tomorrow. Try to get some sleep. You look like hell." The detective walked away, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. The officer locked Kate's cell door and followed, leaving her alone with the drunk's off-key singing and the woman's one-sided argument with ghosts. Kate lay down on the metal bench, used her arm as a pillow, and closed her eyes. She'd slept in worse places, on the floor of a Humvee, in a fighting position outside Kandahar, in the supply closet at Graymont Memorial during a particularly brutal shift when she couldn't make it home. This was just another challenge, another obstacle to endure. But as exhaustion dragged her down toward unconsciousness, she couldn't stop thinking about Jamie Gallagher, standing in that diner watching her get arrested for defending him, listening to Victor Thornton tell him to know his place. She wondered if he'd gone home or if home was just a word for him now, something other people had. She wondered if he was safe, if those boys would find him again, if Thornton's money would shield them from consequences forever. She wondered if she'd just destroyed her life for nothing. Sleep came anyway, pulling her under in fits and starts. Her dreams were populated by faces she'd tried to forget, soldiers she'd treated who didn't make it home, patients who'd coded on her watch, Fahim the interpreter, his face stone still as Sergeant Davis slapped him, the 4 men who died in the ambush, Michael in the garage, the service pistol heavy in his hand. All the people she couldn't save no matter how hard she fought. When she woke, the light coming through the narrow window had shifted. Evening, probably. Her body ached in new and creative ways, muscles stiff from the metal bench head pounding from dehydration and stress. Someone had slid a tray under the cell door while she slept. Bologna sandwich on white bread, apple that looked like it had been in storage since the previous administration, carton of milk. She ate because her training said to eat when food was available. Drank the milk because dehydration would make everything worse. The food tasted like cardboard and defeat. The corridor had gone quiet. The drunk had either sobered up or passed out. The woman with the imaginary arguments had been released or moved. Kate was alone with the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sounds of the precinct. Phones ringing, voices raised, doors slamming, the mundane chaos of law enforcement grinding through another day. She was measuring time by the movement of shadows when the corridor door buzzed open and Morrison walked through again, this time accompanied by a man Kate didn't recognize. Early 40s, wearing a suit that looked expensive but not ostentatious, carrying a leather briefcase that had seen actual use. He had an honest face, if such a thing existed, the kind of face that suggested he'd chosen law because he believed in something, not just because it paid well. Morrison unlocked Kate's cell. "You've got a visitor." The man stepped forward, offered his hand through the bars. "Miss Brennan, my name is Nathaniel Blackwell. I'm an attorney. The firm name is just coincidence, not related to Miranda Blackstone." He paused. "Sergeant Major Duncan McAllister called me. We served together in Afghanistan. He was my commanding officer during my JAG deployment. When he explained your situation, I told him I'd be happy to represent you." Kate shook his hand, confused. "I can't afford—" "Pro bono. Consider it payback for the time Mac saved my life during a mortar attack." He smiled slightly. "Plus, I've been looking for a reason to go up against Miranda Blackstone's tactics. She's good, but she's predictable." Morrison made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. "I'll leave you two to talk. You've got 30 minutes. She walked away and Nate sat down on the bench across from Kate's cell, pulled out a yellow legal pad and a pen. "First question," he said. "Did you assault those boys?" "I defended myself after one grabbed me and the other rushed me. I used appropriate force to neutralize the threat without causing serious injury." Nate wrote something down. "You have military training. Army Medic 3 deployments, Combat Lifesaver certified, plus basic combatives training. Any documented use of force during your service?" Kate thought about Helmand, about the insurgent who tried to grab a wounded soldier during a medevac, about how she'd put him down with the butt of her rifle before he could pull the pin on his grenade, about the after-action report that called it a justified defensive action. "Yes. All ruled justified." Nate nodded. "Good. That establishes competency and a pattern of appropriate response to threats. Second question, are there witnesses who can corroborate your version of events?" "James Gallagher, the Marine they harassed before they came at me. Multiple people in the diner saw what happened." "Mr. Gallagher has a psychiatric history. Thornton's lawyers will use that to undermine his testimony." "I know. Detective Morrison already told me." "But they can't undermine everyone." Nate clicked his pen. "Give me names of other witnesses." Kate ran through the diner in her memory, trying to recall faces and details through the fog of exhaustion. Elderly woman in a booth, probably 70, had her phone out. Said she recorded the whole thing. Margaret something. Construction workers at the counter, maybe 4 of them. Office workers by the window. The counterman, Mike Sullivan. Nate wrote it all down. "The woman with the phone, that's our key. If she has footage showing the boys knocking down Mr. Gallagher, showing them harassing him, showing one of them grabbing you first, then Thornton's case falls apart. His lawyers threatened her. Empty threats, Single-party consent state, and she was recording in a public space. They were trying to intimidate her into deleting the evidence. Nate made another note. I'll subpoena the footage and interview her myself. What about the diner security cameras? Morrison said the footage is grainy and the angle's bad. Bad for prosecution, maybe. Might be fine for defense. I'll get a copy and have it analyzed. He looked up from his legal pad. Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning you'll be arraigned. The prosecution will argue for high bail because of your military training and the severity of the alleged assault. I'll argue for release on your own recognizance based on your clean record, your employment history, and your ties to the community. Judge will probably split the difference and set bail at something manageable. I don't have money for bail. You won't need it. I've already arranged for a bail bond through a veterans fund. They cover first responders and military personnel facing legal issues related to defensive actions. You'll be out by tomorrow afternoon. Kate felt tears prickle at the corners of her eyes and blinked them away hard. She couldn't remember the last time someone had helped her without wanting something in return, without making her feel like a charity case, without strings attached. Why are you doing this? She asked. Nate was quiet for a moment, and something moved behind his eyes. Memory maybe, or pain, or the weight of old debts. Because Mac pulled me out of a burning vehicle while insurgents were shooting at us. Because he held pressure on my femoral artery for 40 minutes until medevac arrived. Because without him, I'd have bled out in the desert, and instead I got to come home, go to law school, build a life. He paused. When he calls and says someone needs help, I don't ask questions. I just show up. I'm not him. No. But you're someone who stood up when everyone else sat down. That matters. Nate stood, gathered his legal pad and briefcase. Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow we start fighting back. He knocked on the cell bars and Morrison appeared to let him out. Kate watched him go, her mind spinning with the sudden shift from despair to something that looked almost like hope. The night passed slowly. Kate dozed in fits and starts, her body demanding rest her mind refused to grant. She kept replaying the scene in the diner, looking for the moment where she could have made a different choice, could have walked away, could have avoided the cascade of consequences that had led to this cell. But every time she ran through the scenario, she hit the same wall. Walking away meant letting Jamie Gallagher get humiliated without consequence, meant teaching two rich kids that they could hurt people for fun, meant being the kind of person who witnesses injustice and does nothing. She'd been that person once, early in her first deployment when she'd watched Sergeant Davis abuse Fahim and stayed silent because speaking up would have caused problems. The interpreter had quit 2 days later. A week after that, their unit had walked into an ambush because nobody knew the local terrain well enough without him. 3 soldiers wounded, 1 killed. Kate had worked on them all, had held pressure on wounds while calling for medevac, had done everything right except for the one thing that mattered: speaking up before it was too late. She'd promised herself after that she wouldn't be silent again. That promise had cost her a lot over the years. A promotion she didn't get because she reported a superior for negligence. A relationship that ended because she wouldn't ignore her partner's prescription drug problem. A comfortable job at a private clinic because she couldn't stomach billing patients for treatments they couldn't afford. And now it might cost her everything. But some prices were worth paying. Morning came with the sounds of the precinct waking up. Shift change. New prisoners being processed. The corridor door buzzing open and closed with rhythmic regularity. Someone brought Kate a breakfast tray that was only marginally better than dinner. Powdered eggs, burnt toast, coffee that tasted like it had been brewed with floor sweepings. She ate anyway, drank the terrible coffee, prepared herself. At 9 o'clock, Morrison came to collect her. Arraignment time. Try not to say anything stupid in front of the judge. They put her in handcuffs again, led her through the maze of corridors to a sally port where a transport van waited. 2 other defendants were already inside. A woman who looked like she'd been crying all night. A man who stared at nothing with the hollow eyes of someone who'd given up. The ride to the courthouse took 20 minutes through morning traffic. Kate watched the city slide past through the van's narrow windows. People going to work, grabbing coffee, living their normal lives while she sat in chains heading to court to answer for the crime of defending someone who couldn't defend himself. The courthouse was a concrete monument to bureaucratic authority. All harsh angles and narrow windows, designed to intimidate rather than welcome. They processed her through another security checkpoint, took her to a holding cell to wait her turn before the judge. Nate found her there an hour later looking fresh and professional in a different suit carrying a briefcase full of documents. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I've been better." "I've got some good news." Margaret O'Brien, the woman from the diner, agreed to testify and provide her video footage. "I watched it last night. It's clear, well lit, and shows everything from the moment those boys walked in until the moment you were arrested." Kate felt her chest loosen slightly. And it shows exactly what you said. The boys harassing Mr. Gallagher, knocking him down, laughing about it. Shows one of them grabbing your wrist when you stood up. Shows you defending yourself with minimal force. It's textbook self-defense. "So the charges will be dropped?" "Not yet. Thornton's attorney is arguing that you used excessive force, that your military training makes you a deadly weapon, that you should have retreated rather than engaged." Nate pulled out his notes. "But with this footage and Mr. Gallagher's testimony, we have a strong defense. The prosecution knows it too." A bailiff appeared at the cell door. "Brennan, you're up." They led her into the courtroom, and Kate felt the weight of it settle over her like a physical thing. Judge Harrison Whitfield sat elevated behind his bench, 60-something with gray hair and the expression of someone who'd heard every excuse and believed none of them. The prosecution table was occupied by a sharp-dressed woman in her 40s who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. And at the defense table sat Nate, clean and pressed and ready to fight. But behind the prosecution, in the first row of the gallery, Victor Thornton sat with Preston and Marcus flanking him like bookends. All three wore suits. All three looked confident, like they'd already won, and this was just theater. Behind Nate's table, Kate saw Jamie Gallagher, still on his crutches but standing straighter. The viral video had brought attention calls from prosthetics companies offering pro bono fittings, VA administrators suddenly returning emails. Help was coming, just not yet. When Jamie saw her, he nodded once, a gesture of solidarity that made Kate's throat tight. The judge called the court to order. Case number 20-24 CR 8847, State versus Catherine Brennan. Charges of assault and battery. How does the defendant plead? Nate stood. "Not guilty, Your Honor." The prosecution stood as well. "Your Honor, given the severity of the assault and the defendant's military training, we request remand without bail." "Miss Brennan has no prior criminal record," Nate countered. "She's a decorated veteran and an ICU nurse with strong ties to the community. She poses no flight risk and no danger to the public. We request release on her own recognizance." The judge looked down at the file in front of him, then up at Kate. "Miss Brennan, you work at Graymont Memorial Hospital?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Are you currently employed?" Kate hesitated, not knowing the answer. Nate stepped in smoothly. "She's been suspended pending the outcome of this case, Your Honor, but she remains an employee in good standing." "Suspended for assaulting patients?" the prosecutor asked with false sweetness. "Suspended as a precautionary measure," Nate shot back. "Standard hospital policy during any legal proceeding involving staff." The judge held up a hand. "Enough. I've reviewed the preliminary evidence, including witness statements and security footage. This appears to be a legitimate dispute over facts, not an open and shut case." He looked at Kate again. "Bail is set at $5,000 cash or bond. Trial date to be set within 60 days. Miss Brennan, you are ordered to have no contact with the alleged victims or any witnesses aside from normal court proceedings." The gavel came down. Kate exhaled slowly. Nate had warned her the bail would be reduced, but hearing it still felt like a reprieve. Behind her, she heard Jamie make a small sound of relief. Victor Thornton leaned over to his attorney, whispered something urgent. The attorney stood. "Your Honor, we'd like to request a restraining order requiring Miss Brennan to stay at least 500 yards from our clients." "On what grounds?" the judge asked. "On the grounds that she's demonstrated violent tendencies and poses a clear threat to their safety." And Nate didn't even wait for permission to respond. "That's ridiculous, Your Honor. My client defended herself after being physically grabbed. She poses no threat to anyone unless they assault her first." The judge looked annoyed. "Request denied. Standard no-contact order stands. Anything else?" The prosecution conferred with Thornton's attorney, then stood again. "The state would like to request an expedited trial date, Your Honor. Given the media attention and the defendant's dangerous nature, we believe justice should be served quickly." 60 days is already expedited for this court's docket," the judge said dryly. "Unless you have a compelling reason beyond wanting to get this off your desk, we'll proceed normally." Thornton's attorney started to object, but the judge cut him off with a look. "We're done here. Next case." The bailiff led Kate back to the holding area where Nate met her 20 minutes later with paperwork and a smile. "Congratulations," he said. "You're about to be a free woman." The bail bondsman was waiting in the courthouse lobby, tired-looking man in his 50s who processed the paperwork with mechanical efficiency. 30 minutes later, Kate walked out into autumn sunlight, still wearing the same scrubs she'd put on 40 hours ago, feeling like she'd aged a decade. Jamie was waiting on the courthouse steps, leaning on his crutches. When he saw her, his whole face transformed with relief. "You're out," he said. "For now. I testified. Told them everything I saw. They tried to make me sound crazy, but I didn't let them." Kate felt her throat tighten. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. You stood up for me when nobody else would. The least I can do is stand up for you." He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "I know we just met, but if there's anything I can do to help with the trial—" "There is." Nate appeared beside them, offering Jamie his card. "I'll need you to sit for a formal deposition. Tell your story on record with all the details. Can you do that?" Jamie took the card, studied it. "Yeah, when?" "Tomorrow afternoon, if possible. I want to get ahead of whatever strategy Thornton's team is planning." They talked logistics while Kate stood there feeling disconnected from her own life, watching it happen around her rather than to her. The exhaustion was catching up again. 40 hours with maybe 6 hours of sleep scattered through it, adrenaline crash hitting her system like a truck. Nate noticed. "You need rest. Real rest. Go home. Sleep for 12 hours. Eat actual food. Don't talk to anyone about the case. Don't post on social media. Don't even jaywalk. Thornton's people will be watching for anything they can use against you." "I don't have a car here," Kate said, realizing it was true. She'd left her car at the hospital parking lot before her shift. That was 2 days ago, a lifetime ago. Nate pulled out his phone. "What's your address? I'll drive you." She gave it to him, too tired to argue. 20 minutes later, she was in the passenger seat of Nate's car, a sensible sedan that smelled like coffee and leather, while he navigated through midday traffic toward her apartment complex on the south side. They didn't talk much. Kate was grateful for that. She stared out the window at the city she'd called home for 3 years, wondering how many people out there had seen her mugshot on the news, how many had already decided she was guilty, how many would remember this even after she was exonerated, if she was exonerated. Nate pulled up in front of her building. 3-story walk-up that had been cheap when she'd moved in and had only gotten cheaper as the neighborhood deteriorated around it. "Call me if you need anything," Nate said. "And Kate, we're going to win this. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but we have the evidence, we have the witnesses, and we have the truth. That still counts for something." Kate nodded, not trusting her voice, and climbed out of the car. She made it up 3 flights of stairs on autopilot, unlocked her door with the spare key she kept under the mat, and stepped into her apartment. It looked exactly like she'd left it. Breakfast dishes in the sink, scrubs in a pile by the bathroom, bed unmade. A time capsule from before everything went wrong. She meant to shower, meant to eat, meant to do all the things Nate had told her to do. Instead, she fell onto her bed fully clothed and was asleep before her head hit the pillow, dropping into unconsciousness like a stone into deep water, dreaming of the diner again. But this time, when Jamie fell, nobody helped him. And when she tried to stand up, she found she was chained to the booth. And Victor Thornton stood over her laughing, while his son ground Jamie's face into the floor, and everyone just watched. Kate woke in darkness, her heart pounding, sheets soaked with sweat. The bedside clock read 2:47 a.m. She'd slept for almost 14 hours. Her phone was on the nightstand, plugged in and charged. Someone from the hospital must have brought her car back and left it in her spot with her keys and phone inside. She picked up the phone and found 63 missed calls, 214 text messages, and a social media presence that had exploded overnight. Someone had leaked her arrest to the press. The story was everywhere. Local news, regional papers, social media platforms she didn't even use. But the narrative wasn't what she'd expected. Instead of painting her as a violent aggressor, most of the coverage focused on a different angle. Decorated veteran arrested for defending disabled Marine, and below that, Victor Thornton's son facing questions after viral video shows harassment. Kate clicked on a link with shaking hands and found herself watching Margaret O'Brien's footage uploaded to every platform viewed millions of times in less than a day. The comment section was a war zone. Some people calling Kate a hero, others calling her a thug. Most just arguing with each other about violence and justice and whether defending someone made you brave or made you a vigilante. But buried in all that noise, Kate found something she hadn't expected. A hashtag, #ISTandWithKate, and a fundraiser started by someone she didn't know to help with her legal fees. It had raised $40,000 in 12 hours. Kate sat there in the darkness of her apartment, staring at the screen, watching the numbers climb, while strangers from across the country contributed $5, $10, sometimes hundreds, sometimes just words of support. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Sergeant Major Williams from 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. We heard what happened. We're coming." Kate stared at the message until the screen went dark, then lit it again with trembling fingers. She didn't know Sergeant Major Williams, didn't know 3rd Battalion. But the message carried weight that transcended individual identity. Marines were coming. Her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Corporal James Rutherford, 1st Marine Division. Saw what happened. We're mobilizing. Then another. Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, flying in from San Diego. You don't stand alone. And another. The messages kept coming through the night like artillery fire, each one from a different name but carrying the same essential message. They were coming. They had heard. They would not let one of their own fall to injustice without a fight. Kate sat cross-legged on her bed, watching the phone light up again and again, feeling something vast and incomprehensible building in the darkness beyond her walls. At 5 a.m. she gave up on sleep, showered for the first time in 2 days, put on clean clothes that felt strange after everything. She made coffee that actually tasted like coffee and stood at her kitchen window watching the city wake up, wondering what the day would bring. The answer came at 7:30 when someone knocked on her door. Kate checked the peephole and found herself looking at a man in his late 60s wearing Marine Corps dress blues, ribbons covering his chest from collar to pocket, the kind of uniform you only saw at funerals and formal ceremonies. She opened the door. "Miss Brennan, I'm Sergeant Major Robert McAllister." He offered his hand, the accent thick as peat. "I apologize for the early hour." Kate shook his hand, noting the grip, firm but not aggressive, the handshake of someone who knew exactly how much force to apply. "Mac, you called Nate for me." "I did. May I come in?" She stepped aside, and Mac entered with the bearing of someone inspecting a forward operating base. His eyes took in details, the sparse furniture, the empty refrigerator visible through the kitchen doorway, the general sense of a life being lived in survival mode rather than comfort. "You live alone?" he asked. "Yes. No family nearby. No family anywhere, really. My parents died when I was 22. No siblings." Mac nodded, like this confirmed something he'd already suspected. "I've reviewed the video footage and the police reports. You defended Corporal Gallagher from assault." "Former corporal. He's out now." "Once a Marine, always a Marine. The discharge papers don't change what he is." Mac pulled out his phone, showed her a screen that made her breath catch. "This is the response so far." It was a spreadsheet. Hundreds of names organized by rank and location. Active duty reserves veterans scattered across 40 states. Next to each name was a notation. Attending, traveling, confirmed. "What is this?" Kate asked. "This is your defense force. Every person on this list is coming to your trial. Some are flying in from overseas. Some are driving for 2 days. All of them are coming because they heard what you did, and they will not let you face this alone." Kate felt her legs go weak and sat down hard on her couch. "I don't understand. I don't know these people." "They know you, or they know what you represent. Every one of them has seen someone in trouble and wished they'd acted. Every one of them has watched the powerful abuse the powerless and felt helpless to stop it. You didn't feel helpless. You acted. That makes you dangerous to people like Victor Thornton, and it makes you precious to people like us." Kate looked at the spreadsheet, 380 names and counting. "The trial is 2 months away." "The trial is in 4 days." Kate's head snapped up. "What?" "Victor Thornton pulled strings. Got a judge to move up the date, citing public safety concerns and media circus. His lawyers filed the motion yesterday afternoon. Your attorney should be calling you any minute to—" Her phone rang. Nate's number. She answered on speaker. "I just heard about the trial date. How did you—" "Never mind." Nate sounded like he was speed-walking, his breath coming fast. "Thornton's team is trying to bulldoze us before we can build a proper defense. They want this over before the story gets any bigger, before public opinion solidifies. 4 days doesn't give us time to depose all the witnesses, doesn't give me time to prepare cross-examination, doesn't give us time to do anything except show up and hope." "Can they do that?" Kate asked. "Just change the trial date. Technically no, practically yes if you have enough money and know the right people. I've already filed an objection but the judge denied it. We're going to trial on Friday whether we're ready or not. Mac leaned toward the phone. This is Sergeant Major McAllister, United States Marine Corps. I'm sitting with Miss Brennan right now. Tell me what you need. A pause on Nate's end. Who am I speaking with? Someone who's very interested in making sure Miss Brennan gets a fair trial. I'm not planning anything illegal. Good, because I'm planning to fill that courtroom with every veteran in driving distance and make sure the jury sees exactly who they're being asked to convict. How many people can you guarantee? Mac checked his phone. Currently at 487 confirmed, probably hit 600 by Friday. She heard Nate whistle softly. That's a lot of dress blues. That's the point. All right, I'll work with that. But I need something else. I need someone who can testify to Miss Brennan's character under fire. Someone with credibility the jury will respect. Someone who witnessed her in combat situations and can speak to her training and restraint. Mac smiled, and it wasn't a nice expression. I think I know exactly who to call. After Nate hung up, Mac made a series of phone calls while Kate sat on her couch trying to process what was happening. Her life had become something she no longer recognized. A story being written by forces beyond her control. There's something else you should know, Mac said, putting his phone away. Victor Thornton isn't just some rich developer. He's a retired 3-star general, made his rank during the Gulf War, has connections throughout the military and political establishment. Kate felt ice in her stomach. That's why he knew how to give Jamie orders. That's why Jamie responded. Aye, conditioning runs deep. Mac's expression hardened. But Victor's got skeletons. Back in '91 during Desert Storm, his unit massacred 42 Iraqi civilians in a village outside Basra. Called it a combat engagement. Covered it up. 3 soldiers who witnessed it tried to report. All 3 ended up with bad conduct discharges for unrelated infractions within 6 months. How do you know this? Because one of those soldiers was my cousin. Drank himself to death 10 years later. But before he died, he told me everything. Mac pulled out another document. I can't prove it in court. The records are sealed. The witnesses are dead or discredited. But I can make sure the jury knows that Victor Thornton is the kind of man who destroys people who get in his way. Kate looked at the document, at Mac's face, at the rage burning behind those careful eyes. This is about more than me, isn't it? She said quietly. Everything's about more than just one person, lass. Your fight, my fight, your Corporal Gallagher's fight, they're all the same fight. Against people who think power means they don't have to answer for what they do. Mac stood. Get some rest. We've got work to do before Friday. The next 3 days moved with surreal speed. Nate worked 18-hour days preparing the defense, coordinating with Mac to organize the veteran response, tracking down witnesses that Thornton's legal team kept trying to intimidate into silence. Margaret O'Brien received threatening phone calls from unknown numbers. The construction workers from the diner found themselves being audited by the IRS. Mike Sullivan got another visit from health inspectors who'd never cared about Riley's diner before. But nobody backed down. Kate spent the time in a haze of preparation, sitting for depositions, reviewing her military records, being coached by a jury consultant Nate brought in on how to testify without sounding rehearsed or defensive. They're going to paint you as dangerous, the consultant said, someone who couldn't let go of military training, who saw threats everywhere, who responded with disproportionate force. You need to stay calm, stay truthful, and let the jury see you as human, not as a weapon. I am human, Kate said. I know, but the prosecution is going to argue otherwise. Counter that by being controlled, measured, empathetic. The media circus intensified. News vans parked outside Kate's apartment building until the landlord threatened to call the cops. Reporters ambushed her in the parking lot, shoving microphones in her face, asking how it felt to assault children. She learned to say no comment and keep walking. But not everyone was hostile. The fundraiser topped $100,000. Letters arrived from across the country, some supporting her, some condemning her. All of them proof that her story had touched something raw in the national consciousness. Thursday night, the evening before the trial, Mac showed up at her apartment again with takeout and a folder full of documents. Eat, he said, pushing containers across her kitchen table. You need your strength. Kate picked at the food, her stomach too tight for hunger. What's in the folder? Thornton's witness list. His lawyers are bringing in expert witnesses to testify about your military training, psychologists to argue about PTSD and hypervigilance, character witnesses to talk about how traumatized his son is. What about our witnesses? We have Margaret with the video. We have Gallagher to testify about what happened. We have the construction workers who saw the whole thing. Mac paused. And we have something else. Something Thornton doesn't know about yet. What? Mac pulled out another document. His son has a record. Juvenile sealed. But I have contacts who know people who remember. 3 incidents at 2 different prep schools. Assault harassment. 1 case involving a disabled student at Westbridge Preparatory that got settled quietly for $5 million. Nate's filing a motion tomorrow morning to have the records unsealed as character evidence. Kate felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. Will it work? 50-50. Judge might rule it's prejudicial, but even if he doesn't allow it, the fact that we tried to introduce it will make the jury wonder. Plant doubt. Mac leaned back, studying her. How are you holding up real answer? Kate thought about lying. But Mac had known her in Helmand when she was 19 and terrified. He'd know. I'm scared, she admitted. Not of losing. I mean, I'm scared of that too. But mostly I'm scared that even if I win, this is who I am now. The violent nurse. That's what people will remember. Mac was quiet for a long moment. Some people will remember that. Others will remember the woman who stood up when everyone else sat down. You don't get to control your legacy, Katie. You just get to control your choices. And your choice, it created something that matters. What if it doesn't matter? Then you made it standing up instead of sitting down, and that's still better. He stood. Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow we fight. And last, we're going to win. Kate tried to sleep but managed only fitful rest. Dreams of courtrooms turning into combat zones. Juries made of faceless shadows. She woke at 5 a.m., showered, dressed in the only professional outfit she owned. Gray slacks and a white blouse that Nate had approved. She stared at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. Nate picked her up at 7. He looked exhausted but wired. Ready? He asked. No. Good. Means you're not delusional. They arrived at the courthouse at 7:45. Kate expected a crowd but wasn't prepared for what she found. The entire front plaza was filled with veterans in dress uniforms. Hundreds of them standing in formation like they were waiting for inspection, silent and still as statues. Marine Corps blues, Army greens, Navy whites, Air Force service dress. They stood in ranks organized by branch and unit. Kate climbed out of Nate's car and just stared. Mac appeared at her elbow. 487 present, another 100 inside securing seats. We've been here since 0500. Mac, this is? Kate couldn't find words. This is what happens when you defend one of ours. Come on, we need to get you inside. The veterans parted to create a corridor, and Kate walked through it. None of them spoke. None of them broke formation. But every single one of them met her eyes as she passed. And in those gazes, she saw recognition, respect, and rage held on a leash. The courthouse steps were mobbed with reporters, but the veterans had created a buffer zone that kept the cameras at a distance. Kate made it inside without having to answer questions, though she heard them shouted anyway. Questions about violence and whether she regretted defending Gallagher, whether military training made her a danger to society. Nate guided her through security and up to the courtroom on the 3rd floor. The gallery was already packed, veterans filling every available seat with overflow standing at the back. The prosecution table was occupied by Miranda Blackstone and her team. 3 lawyers in expensive suits arrayed around her. Miranda was 50-something, silver-haired, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than Kate's monthly rent. She looked up when Kate entered and smiled with all the warmth of a shark. Victor Thornton sat in the front row of the gallery behind the prosecution, Preston and Marcus flanking him like bookends. Both boys looked nervous, shifting in their seats, eyes darting to the sea of uniforms filling the courtroom. Victor himself looked confident, almost bored. Checking his phone like this was just another business meeting. Jamie Gallagher sat behind the defense table, dressed in khakis and a button-down shirt, his service ribbons pinned to his chest. Still on his crutches. When he saw Kate, he nodded once. The bailiff called for all to rise. Judge Harrison Whitfield entered. He surveyed the packed courtroom with raised eyebrows. This is quite the turnout, he observed dryly. I trust everyone understands that outbursts or disruptions will result in immediate removal from these proceedings. The veterans remained silent. Good, let's begin. Bailiff, bring in the jury. The jury filed in. 12 citizens who would decide Kate's fate. 6 men, 6 women, various ages and backgrounds. Their faces carefully neutral. Nate had spent hours on jury selection. Miranda had systematically eliminated anyone with military connections. Judge Whitfield gavelled the court to order. We are here for the trial of Catherine Brennan, charged with 2 counts of assault and battery. Miss Blackstone, your opening statement. Miranda stood with fluid grace. She walked to the jury box and smiled. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a case about violence. About what happens when someone with military training decides that violence is an acceptable response to words. About 2 young men who went to a diner for breakfast and left bloodied and traumatized. She gestured to Preston and Marcus. Preston Thornton and Marcus Sheffield are 19 and 18 years old. They're students, they're sons, until Catherine Brennan decided to assault them in a public place in front of dozens of witnesses. Nate started to rise, but Miranda kept talking. The defense will try to tell you this was self-defense. They'll show you video of a scuffle, an argument. But ask yourselves, does an argument justify violence? Objection, Nate said quietly. Mischaracterization. Sustained, Judge Whitfield said. Miss Blackstone, stick to facts. Miranda didn't even blink. The facts are simple. Catherine Brennan has extensive combat training. She served 3 tours where she learned to neutralize threats with lethal efficiency. She returned home with that training intact, but without the military structure to control it. When she encountered a situation she didn't like, she defaulted to violence. She walked along the jury box. We will present expert testimony about military training and its effects. We will show you how someone with Miss Brennan's background can be dangerous even when they don't intend to be. We will demonstrate that her actions were aggressive, disproportionate, and criminal. Miranda turned to face Kate. The defendant wants you to see her as a hero, but heroes don't assault young adults in diners. At the end of this trial, I'm confident you'll see Catherine Brennan for what she is, a person who chose violence when words would have sufficed. She sat down. The courtroom remained silent. Nate touched Kate's arm. Stay calm. Mr. Blackwell, Judge Whitfield said, your opening statement. Nate stood and approached the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, my client is sitting right there. Catherine Brennan, former Army medic, ICU nurse, decorated veteran who spent 3 deployments saving lives under fire. He paused. She also weighs 135 pounds and stands 5 feet 6 inches. He gestured to Preston and Marcus. Preston Thornton is 6'2" and weighs 215 pounds. Marcus Sheffield is 5'11" and 190. Combined, they outweigh my client by nearly 200 pounds. Nate pulled out a tablet, loaded Margaret's video. You're going to see footage of what really happened. You'll see 2 young men harass a disabled Marine veteran. You'll see them knock him to the ground. You'll see them laugh while he struggled. He played a segment on the courtroom screens, and Kate watched the jury's faces shift as they saw Jamie fall. You'll also see my client stand up, not to attack, but to help. She knelt beside Corporal Gallagher. She checked if he was injured, and only when Preston Thornton physically grabbed her wrist did she defend herself. He played that segment, and several jury members leaned forward. The prosecution wants you to believe Catherine Brennan is dangerous because of her military training. But that training is exactly why this ended with bruises instead of broken bones. She used minimum force to neutralize a threat. That's not assault. That's textbook self-defense. Nate walked back to the defense table. At the end of this trial, you'll be asked to decide if protecting someone who can't protect themselves is a crime. I trust you'll reach the right conclusion. He sat down. The trial proceeded through the morning. Miranda called Preston, who gave coach testimony about being attacked unprovoked. Nate destroyed him on cross with the video showing the harassment, the blocking, the grab. Marcus testified next, his story matching Preston's too perfectly. Obviously rehearsed. Then came the expert witness. Dr. Raymond Foster, psychologist specializing in PTSD and military trauma. Dr. Foster, Miranda asked, can you explain how military combat training affects the brain? Certainly. Combat training creates neural pathways that prioritize threat assessment and rapid response. Soldiers are trained to identify threats and neutralize them with overwhelming force. This is essential in war zones but problematic in civilian settings. He went on for 20 minutes. Compelling testimony backed by research. Nate's cross-examination was surgical. Dr. Foster, have you ever evaluated Miss Brennan? No. Have you reviewed her medical records? No. So everything you testified about is generalized, not specific to my client. Her discharge evaluation shows no PTSD diagnosis, no hypervigilance, superior judgment under stress. Does that change your testimony? Foster adjusted his glasses. Not substantially. Training creates patterns regardless of individual psychology. So anyone with military training is dangerous by default. Not automatically, but it increases risk. Thank you. No further questions. The afternoon continued. Margaret O'Brien with her video unshakable under Miranda's attempts to attack her credibility. Jamie with his testimony standing firm despite Miranda's questions about his PTSD. By the time court recessed, Kate felt exhausted. Outside, Mac was waiting. "Tomorrow morning we call our surprise witness, William Hastings, the student Preston pushed downstairs at Westbridge. He's willing to testify despite the NDA." Kate felt something shift. "He's risking everything." "Aye, because some fights are worth it." That night, Kate couldn't sleep. She thought about William Hastings, about Jamie, about Margaret, about all the people putting themselves on the line because they'd decided silence had a cost too high. Friday morning came fast. The courtroom was packed again. More veterans. News that this was the climactic day had drawn even more. Nate called William Hastings to the stand. The young man walked with a slight limp. He was sworn in and sat looking at the jury. "Mr. Hastings," Nate said, "how do you know Preston Thornton?" "We attended Westbridge Preparatory together. Junior year I was in a wheelchair recovering from spinal surgery." "What happened?" Will took a breath. "Preston and 3 friends pushed my wheelchair downstairs. I fractured 3 vertebrae. Spent 6 more months in physical therapy. Doctors said I was lucky I wasn't paralyzed." "What consequences did Preston face?" "None. His father donated $5 million. Preston transferred. My family signed an NDA." "Why are you testifying today?" Will's voice was steady. "Because I'm tired of watching people like Preston hurt people like me and walk away because their fathers have money. If there are legal consequences for telling the truth, I'll accept them." The courtroom was silent. Miranda tried to shake him on cross. Failed. Then came Principal Warren from Westbridge confirming 4 incidents, confirming the donation, confirming that money had erased consequences. And finally, Mac took the stand. Sergeant Major Duncan McAllister in full dress uniform chest, covered with ribbons earned over 40 years of service. Nate walked him through his credentials, his relationship with Kate. "Sergeant Major, would Catherine Brennan attack unarmed civilians without justification?" Mac looked at the jury. "No, sir. If Kate Brennan put hands on someone, they gave her no choice. And if they walked away breathing, she showed them more mercy than they probably didn't deserve." Miranda tried to cross-examine. Mac stonewalled her with calm authority. When he stepped down, Nate stood. "The defense rests, Your Honor." Judge Whitfield looked at his watch. "We'll break for lunch and return for closing arguments at 2 p.m. But before the bailiff could move, the courtroom door opened. A woman rushed in, handed a folder to Nate. He opened it. His eyes went wide. "Your Honor, the defense requests an immediate conference in chambers. New evidence of witness tampering and jury intimidation has come to light." The courtroom erupted. Victor Thornton's face drained of color. The chambers conference lasted 30 minutes. When they returned, Judge Whitfield looked furious. "This court is declaring a mistrial. All charges against Miss Brennan are dismissed with prejudice and cannot be refiled. Furthermore, I am referring evidence of obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and jury intimidation to the FBI." He turned to Victor. "Mr. Thornton, you are ordered to surrender your passport and remain within this jurisdiction pending federal investigation." FBI agents entered. Victor was arrested in the courtroom. Preston and Marcus watched their father in handcuffs for the first time in their lives. The veterans in the gallery remained silent, discipline holding even in victory. Kate stood there watching justice happen. Mac's hand on her shoulder. "It's over, lass. You won." Kate walked out of the courthouse into brilliant autumn sunlight. The veterans were still there, still in formation, and as she emerged, they began to clap. Not loudly, not theatrically. Just steady, respectful applause that acknowledged what had been won and what it had cost. Jamie was waiting at the bottom of the steps. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For showing me it's possible to fight back. For showing me I'm not helpless." Kate felt her throat tighten. "You testified. You stood up too." "Because you showed me how." Nate appeared beside them. "There's going to be media, a lot of it. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to." Kate looked at the cameras, at the reporters already shouting questions, at the story being written in real time. "I'll say something," she decided. She walked to the microphone setup flanked by Nate and Mac, with Jamie standing just behind her. The questions came like artillery fire, but she waited for silence. "My name is Catherine Brennan," she said. "I'm a nurse. I'm a veteran. And 4 days ago I did what anyone should do when they see someone being hurt. I stood up." She paused, looking directly at the cameras. "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who decided that silence costs too much. That watching injustice and doing nothing makes you complicit. I made that mistake once a long time ago and people died because of it. I won't make it again." "Do you regret defending Corporal Gallagher?" a reporter shouted. "Not for a second. What do you say to people who think you used excessive force?" Kate looked at Jamie, at his crutches, at the quiet dignity in his eyes. "I say that 2 boys knocked a disabled veteran to the ground and laughed about it while 43 people watched and did nothing. I became number 44. The only difference is I decided that wasn't acceptable." "What's next for you?" Kate thought about that, about the hospital that had suspended her, about the career that might be over, about the future that looked nothing like she'd planned. "I'm going to keep being a nurse, keep standing up, keep teaching people that silence has a price and sometimes the right choice is the hard one." She stepped away from the microphone. Mac guided her through the crowd to Nate's car. As they pulled away, Kate looked back at the courthouse, at the veterans still standing in formation, at Jamie talking to reporters, telling his story, finding his voice, at the beginning of something new. 3 months after the mistrial, Victor Thornton was convicted on federal charges: witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and during the investigation, evidence of his 1991 war crimes finally surfaced. 8 years in federal prison, $5 million fine. Dishonorable discharge from retirement. He lost his rank, his pension, his empire built on blood and silence. Preston and Marcus faced civil suits from William Hastings and 2 other victims who came forward after the trial. Their trust funds were depleted. They were last seen working at a warehouse loading trucks, learning what consequences felt like when money couldn't erase them. Kate's life transformed slowly then, all at once. Graymont Memorial reinstated her with a formal apology and offered her a new position developing crisis intervention training for healthcare workers, teaching nurses and doctors how to de-escalate situations, when to intervene, how to protect patients and themselves. She accepted. Part-time ICU to keep her skills sharp, part-time teaching to share what she'd learned. Her first training session had 35 attendees. She got a standing ovation after. By the end of the first year, she'd trained over 1,200 healthcare workers across 3 states. Jamie Gallagher graduated with a Master of Social Work degree 18 months after the trial. He became a patient advocate at the VA, helping veterans navigate the system that had failed him. His prosthetic, donated by a company after his story went viral, gave him mobility. His purpose gave him life. He visited Kate's apartment once a month for what they called strategy sessions, but were really just 2 people who'd survived something terrible, making sure they were both still okay. Mac retired from active service and started the Last Guard Foundation, connecting aging veterans with purpose, mentoring young service members, creating a network of people who understood that the battle doesn't end when you come home, it just changes shape. The foundation had 1,400 members in the first year, growing every month. Riley's Diner became Victory Diner after Mike Sullivan decided a new name fit the new reality. Margaret O'Brien's photo hung on the wall with a plaque underneath. Courage is witnessing injustice and refusing to stay silent. Every Thursday morning, veterans ate for free. 40 to 60 attendees. A community built from one moment of standing up growing into something permanent. 18 months after the trial, Kate stood in a hospital conference room teaching crisis de-escalation to 40 students, young nurses fresh out of school, veteran medics transitioning to civilian health care, EMTs, hospital security officers. "Most of you will never see combat," she said, pacing in front of the projector screen. "But you'll face moments where everything goes wrong, where someone's dying and you have to make impossible choices, where you have to decide between following the rules and doing what's right. That's the moment that defines you." A young nurse raised her hand. Fresh-faced 23 maybe, with the eager nervousness of someone who hadn't been broken yet. "How do you live with it?" she asked. "After you make a choice like that, when people judge you for it?" Kate was honest. "You build something that lasts longer than the moment. You teach others. You make sure the next person has better options than you did. You turn your worst day into someone else's best lesson." She clicked to the next slide. A photo of Riley's Diner, Jamie on the floor, Preston and Marcus laughing. "This is the moment I'm talking about, not the fight, not the arrest. This. When 43 people watched and 42 decided it wasn't their problem." The room was silent. The question you have to ask yourself isn't, "What would I do in this situation?" It's, "What person do I want to be when situations like this happen?" Because they will happen. In your ER, in your ambulance, in your ICU, and you'll have maybe 3 seconds to decide who you are. She clicked to the next slide. The courtroom. The veterans in formation. Justice being served. I'm not going to tell you that standing up always works out. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you lose your job, your career, your freedom. But I will tell you that sitting down has a cost too. And that cost compounds. It builds. Until one day, you're the person who watched 43 times and did nothing 43 times, and you don't recognize yourself anymore. After class, Mac was waiting in the hallway. Older now, moving slower but unbowed. He handed her an envelope, a letter on Last Guard Foundation letterhead. Kate read it, her voice cracking halfway through. Katie, lass, I'm 69 years old. Fought in 4 wars, trained thousands. And you know what I learned? It's not about the fight. It's about what you build after. You stood up when the world sat down. Now you're teaching them how to stand. That's legacy. Proud of ye. Always have been. Mac. Kate folded the letter carefully, looked at Mac. Thank you, she said, for everything. You earned it. Now Victory Diner Jamie's already there, and Maggie's making her famous corned beef. I'm buying. You're always buying. Aye, well, someone has to keep that place running. They walked together through hospital corridors where Kate had once worked 30-hour shifts, where she'd saved lives and lost them, where she'd learned that medicine was as much about courage as it was about knowledge. Outside, the afternoon sun painted everything gold. At Victory Diner, Jamie was waiting in their usual booth. Thursday, 7 a.m., same as it had been every week for 18 months. He stood when he saw them balanced easily on his prosthetic. Got some news, Jamie said, sliding a letter across the table. Kate read it. An acceptance letter. University of Washington. Doctoral program in social work. Full scholarship. They said my personal essay about a nurse who stood up in a diner made the committee cry, Jamie explained. Made them remember why they got into this field. Kate looked up, blinking hard. You changed my life, Jamie said. That morning, that choice, everything after. You stood up too. You testified. Because you showed me how, Jamie paused. I've been thinking about what you said in that press conference, about silence having a price, about how you made a mistake once and people died. Kate went very still. I looked it up, Jamie continued gently. Fahim, the interpreter, the ambush. I'm not asking you to talk about it. I just want you to know that I understand something now. What? That morning in the diner you weren't just defending me. You were defending yourself, the person you promised to be after Helmand, after Fahim, after you learned what silence costs. Kate felt tears building and didn't try to stop them. And that person, Jamie's voice was steady, she's here to stay. Because of you, she's here to stay in me too. Behind the counter, Margaret O'Brien poured coffee without being asked. On the wall, her photo smiled down at them. The breakfast crowd filtered in. Construction workers, veterans, nurses coming off shift, young and old, whole and broken and healing. Mac raised his coffee cup. To standing up, Jamie raised his. To refusing to be moved. Kate raised hers, looking at these 2 men who'd become family. To second chances. 3 cups met in the middle with a quiet clink. Outside Victory Diner, the morning sun climbed higher over Graymont City. Traffic flowed. People rushed to work. Life continued in all its messy, beautiful complexity. But in a corner booth where a Marine had once fallen and a nurse had once stood, 3 people sat together over coffee and breakfast. Not because they had to, because they'd learned that some tables are worth keeping. Some people are worth fighting for. And some mornings, 18 months after everything falls apart, you wake up and realize you've built something better than what you lost. Kate thought about Fahim, about the 4 soldiers, about Michael, about all the people she couldn't save. And she thought about Jamie getting his doctorate helping other veterans find their way. About Mac connecting 1,400 lost souls to purpose. About Margaret, whose 30 seconds of courage had changed everything. About the 1,200 healthcare workers she'd trained who would face their own moments of choice. About the ripples spreading outward from one decision made in a diner on a Tuesday morning. Legacy isn't built in moments of comfort, she thought. It's built in the hard choices, the scary choices, the choices where you stand up when everyone else sits down and refuse to be moved. Somewhere in a federal prison 8 states away, Victor Thornton woke to another day of consequences. Learning finally that some debts come due no matter how much money you have or how much power you think you wield. While in a diner named for Victory, 3 people who'd won something far more valuable than a trial sat together in the morning light. They'd won themselves back, and that Kate thought was worth every scar. The coffee was hot, the company was good, the sun was bright, and the world kept turning, but it turned a little differently now, because one woman had decided enough was enough. That silence cost too much. that defending the defenseless mattered more than safety, that some moments demand you become the person you always promised you'd be, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Kate finished her coffee, set the cup down, and smiled at the two men across from her. "Same time next week?" she asked. "Wouldn't miss it," Jamie said. "Aye, lass," Mac agreed. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." Outside, the city woke up to another day. Inside, three people sat together in the quiet knowledge that they'd fought for something that mattered, and won. Not just the trial, but themselves. Their dignity, their courage, their refusal to be the people who watch and do nothing. That was the real victory, and it was worth every price they'd paid to get here.